The Rise of Torg. That was in the days when the Orcs were at war with the neighboring realm of men. The fights, which the Orcs initially treated as malicious and non-threatening attacks, turned into a regular war by the end of the day. The war lasted for years and took hundreds of lives on each side. Torg, who at the time still did not have his own nickname and was simply Torg, assisted Chief Igar with his shamanic skills. The scales of victory were tipping to one side or the other, and it soon became clear that if one of the opponents did not take the initiative, the war would continue for many more years, leading to the mutual destruction of both sides, at which point no one could claim victory. Neither Igar nor Torg intended to wait until then, let alone for the moment when their enemies would realize the same. They decided to act. Igar, as a chief, could not abandon his troops, so the one who went on a secret mission was Torg. He set off on a moonless night, so that not even Quar, Roquan, and Ion could follow his steps. There was a long and dangerous journey ahead of him to the Valley of Ongua. According to ancient legends, centuries ago, light, magic, and chaos had locked a ferocious and bloodthirsty beast somewhere deep in the depths of the caves in the valley. It was so terrifying that the three creators, rarely in agreement, this time had no doubt that the creature should be imprisoned at the bottom of the deepest and most inaccessible depths in all Elysium. According to the legend, whoever managed to reach and defeat the beast would possess a powerful and fearsome weapon. Torg and Igar came to a conclusion that in the war against humans, they cannot count on numerical superiority, as they had already used the help of all the supporting clans. Therefore, something else was required to bring victory to the Orcs. The mythical weapon seemed to them to be an excellent choice. Torg traveled 19 nights and 19 days, all the time trying to stay out of sight and out of the way of passing creatures. He avoided trails and more trodden paths, opting for forests and overgrown, neglected ducks where he could see no fresh tracks. He didn't think anyone would discover his plan, but humans had their spies everywhere. He preferred not to risk a rumor of a lone orc shaman traveling towards the Ongua Valley, reaching their garrison. When he ran out of supplies, he ate what he found or hunted and drew water straight from the rivers he passed. Finally, on the evening of the 19th day, having climbed a rocky hilltop covered with brown and red mosses, he stood at the gateway to the picturesque and ominous Ongua Valley. Drowning in lush vegetation, in the rays of the setting sun, it seemed the most beautiful place he had ever seen. However, the black cavities peeking out from the trees and bushes here and there, which were the entrances to the caves, would send a shiver down the spine of even the bravest warrior. Torg knew that finding the entrance to the right one, the one that hid the beast, would not be easy, especially in the dark. On top of that, a storm was approaching, so he decided to take shelter in the vestibule of the nearest cavern and set off on the proper search the next morning. So he did. He gathered some dried wood and made a small fire, where he ate a modest meal and, exhausted, fell asleep in no time. He was awakened by desperate, agonizing moans coming from inside the cave. Without thinking long, he grabbed his weapon and cautiously made his way towards where the voices were coming from. After a while, the blackness of the cave engulfed him almost completely. so that he could not even see his outstretched hands, which were carefully exploring the space in front of him. Suddenly, not far away, he saw members of his clan and an entire family being brutally slaughtered by masked warriors. Without hesitation, he rushed to help them, but before he could reach them, what he saw dissolved into the thick air of the cave. At the same time, out of nowhere, there was a clear whisper. "Don't go there. Turn back." Torg, slightly dazed, however, ignored the whisper and walked on, guided by the moans and wails. After a while, in one of the rock crevices, he seemed to spot his father. Once a strong warrior, he now lay pale and almost lifeless on a sweaty bed. Torg rushed towards him, but again, before he could get close enough, the image dissolved before his eyes. A whisper could be heard again in the cavern. "Turn back." Torg, however, decided to go on, and a few dozen steps later, he saw himself this time murdering Chief Igar. The shaman's fright was great, but nevertheless, he did not listen to the voice, which again persistently urged him to turn back. He walked on, full of determination, until he finally came to a small cavern in the middle of which a hooded figure was sitting on a damp boulder. "What are you looking for here?" "I have come to kill you." "I cannot be killed. I am fear. You can only defeat me within yourself." Having said this, the hooded figure slowly stood up, and then, in a flash, faster than Torg had time to even blink, approached him and touched his chest with an icy hand. Before he could blink a second time, the figure disappeared. Torg sprang from his makeshift bed. The fire at the entrance to the cave was barely smoldering. He looked around, but saw no one. He touched the spot where he still felt fear's icy touch and noticed the imprinted corpse white hand. Torg returned to Igar's camp exactly 19 days later. The chief immediately noted a new, remarkable energy emanating from him and wondered if it came from the imprint on his chest. Soon, scouts reported to Igar that an army of humans in substantial numbers was gathering a few days away from their camp. Rumors began to circulate that untold quantities of elytronite had been found in the vast caverns known as the Grottos of Hirkim, located at the foot of the mountains, and that the humans intended to occupy them. Torg insisted that they should set out and attack the humans before too many arrived and get the elytronite from the caves. A large part of the army supported Torg's idea, but the leader did not want to act rashly and decided to call in more allies. However, Torg's insistence was successful, and after 5 days, they set off without waiting for reinforcements. By that time, the humans had managed to set up camp near the caves. Igar ordered to speed up. The size of the two armies was similar, but as they marched west along a wide and deep ravine, at the mouth of which was a camp of the humans, scouts brought news that more enemy troops were coming from the other side. They found themselves trapped, and doubt began to spread among the orcs. Igar did not know whether to attack the people in the camp or to try to get out of the ravine and confront the army that was coming from the east. Torg proposed that instead of fleeing, he and a small number of orcs would prepare an ambush to stop enemy reinforcements, while the rest should quickly attack the troops in the camp. The plan to separate the troops was bold but risky. Nevertheless, Igar agreed to the shaman's idea. They quickly began planning the ambush. Axes were picked up, and several trees were cut down. Meanwhile, Torg was absorbed in preparing bloody rituals. After several hours, everything was ready. Just before the arrival of the enemy troops, the shaman cast spells on his orcs, which awoke their uncontrollable bloodlust. They attacked unsuspecting troops of men from below the ground and from between the mountains. The first to jump out with a rousing shout was Torg, hidden behind a boulder on a rock shelf. He summoned a blood elemental that knocked down 2 horsemen in heavy armor. He was followed by others, and the stunned men began to fall under the blows of hammers and axes. The fight was fierce, as the human troops were numerous and defeat was imminent. Torg, however, set an example of bravery when he used spells to reinforce the orcs' strength and lust for murder, and shouts to encourage them to fight. Torg himself felt a surge of strength with each enemy death. Finally, his elemental knocked the commander off his horse and threw his body at Torg's feet. This meant only one thing: victory. As he stood over the dead body of the commander and the orcs slaughtered the scattered survivors, a cry rang in his ears.
"Dad, I won't spare you. You are already dead."
He raised his head and saw that the young man who was running towards the shaman was stopped by 2 knights.
"Leofric, no! We must retreat!"
They shouted to him, but the boy struggled on, showing admirable strength. Torg stood proudly above the commander and waited. The men, however, managed to subdue the boy and retreated into the mountains, only a handful escaping. Cowards, thought satisfied Torg, and looked at the imprint on his chest. They had won, but they did not know what the situation was in the enemy camp. They rushed to join Igar. They arrived at the last moment as the humans surrounded the orcs and pushed them against the steep walls of the mountains. As the sun was setting, Igar's army defended themselves with the last of their strength. The army, led by Torg, was spotted too late, and his orcs, still under the influence of blood magic, surprised the humans from behind. This turned the tide of the battle. The enemy soldiers panicked and scattered across the valley.
"Where is Lenhar?"
They asked each other, terrified, as they awaited the arrival of the general at the head of reinforcements. They did not know that only his son was left alive with a few other men, and together they fled into the mountains. Torg, regardless of anything, kept stepping forward. He shouted incantations in such a way that this alone sowed fear in the ranks of their enemy. His orcs, constantly hungry for blood, did not leave the shaman's side. They chopped and slaughtered people without mercy, making it seem as if they had just entered the battle. It was a long evening, but in the end, hardly a single man in the valley was left alive. The orcs released only 10 men to carry the news of their humiliating defeat back to their brothers. It soon turned out that the rumors were just rumors, and the orcs found scarce amounts of elytronite in the caves. But the message about the Battle of the Hirkim Grottos was widely spread. After all, many brave men lost their lives that day. So the effort was not in vain. For many years to come, the name of these caves aroused terror among the people, and some even claimed to have heard there the groans of the fallen. Torg, on the other hand, the shaman with the sign of the White Hand on his chest, who distinguished himself by his great acumen and courage, and defeated General Lenhar, was remembered as Whitehand. Thus, the battle was a considerable success, and Torg's name, pronounced with fear, became permanently embedded in the ranks of the humans. The next few clashes determined the victory of the Orcs. Since then, not only the humans, but all warriors in Elysium have trembled upon hearing the name Torg and raised their eyes to the sky, asking for the support of the three creators.